Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rokos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rokos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with zero trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rokos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ahmed Bouzid, and I have with me today three wonderful people who are going to help me advance my thinking on the topic of transhumanism. As I was telling the folks, this is part of a series that I've started. This is episode 3. The first two were with Professor Steve Fuller, and the second one with Zoltan Istvan, and they were one-on-one conversations. This one is a sort of a conversation with three other folks, besides myself, folks who know a lot more about the movement than I do. I would say I wasn't aware of it about a year ago, and I've been learning since then. Okay, so with us are, and I apologize if I say your last name incorrectly, Andrea Cubitt, VP.
That's right.
VP External Scientific Alliances and Intellectual Property at, is it Tire Pharma?
A-Tire Pharma.
A-Tire Pharma. Okay. I have also Gennady Stolyarov. Is that right?
That's correct.
Wonderful. And he's chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, and we'll get to hear all about the wonderful things that they do. And last but not least is Joe Bardin. He's president at Relativity Writing. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's Bardin.
Bardin, I'm sorry. You see, there you go. I thought it was the easiest name.
Yeah, Joe.
Joe is Joe Bardin. I'm sorry. Excellent. Well, welcome and thank you again for making the time. So I'll give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit more about yourselves as you answer my first question. So I'm not a fan of definitions. Like I'm not a guy who thinks that one can define a thing, right? I'm more like I don't know, in the you've heard of Wittgenstein, right? The philosopher, where it's a family. Like to understand something, it's a spectrum of concepts and it's a whole ecosystem of concepts, right? So transhumanism is like that. But let me give the definition. One of the definitions that I liked. That would be our starting point. And what I would like for you guys to do, if you could, to help me, is not only have this definition that I'll read. If you were to take one particular thing about transhumanism, whether it's a technology or a belief, or whatever it may be, that you think captures what transhumanism is, as an example, right? Something concrete, right? What would it be? So I'm going to read the definition, and I will start with Andrea, and then rotate. I have you this way. Andrea, Gennady, and Joe Bardin. All right. So I'll read the Oxford one. So the Oxford definition is transhumanism is the belief or theory that the human race can evolve beyond its current physical and mental limitations, especially by means of science and technology. Okay, so that's the definition. I think it's useful enough. And the reason why I think you can help is because if I read this definition, I'll say, haven't we been doing this, since the beginning of times, right? Yeah. Like shoes are definitely technology that allowed us to go and walk in places where you couldn't walk before. Glasses, these glasses here, without them, I would not be functional. Actually, I would be somebody else, to be honest with you. So how can we go beyond that definition, which is very, I don't know, not very, doesn't capture really what transhumanism is. And I will start if we could with Andrea.
Yeah, no, fine. I think that there is a danger for, and let me back up a second. I totally agree with what you were saying before. Transhumanism and those concepts around enhancing the human body have been around for almost forever, as long as humans start take up tools. I think that there's a danger for the movement, which is to create an ideology that is then criticized and then used to prevent in ways that are not necessarily useful for the entire evolution of human beings as a race. Now, I think from my perspective, I think there's two aspects here. One is the practical implementation of transhumanistic ideas of how you actually take technology and help people. And then there's this bigger philosophical, ideological arguments that I think I'm less interested in. Because I think that it's just
I'm sorry to interrupt. If you were to pick one, so that's the definition, sort of like it's high level and all. But if you were to pick one, either technology or idea or concept, something practical, that you say that this embodies, or this can, if you understand this, you have understood what the transhumanism is. What would that be if you were to pick one?
I think for me, it's like the company I'm about to set up, Dionysus, is about digital screening and epigenetics. I think this is a practical application where you would take a digital signal, basically understanding how we feel, what teaching computers about emotions, and then interceding and providing help feedback based on an epigenetic signature, inherent vulnerability. So that today works through our frontal cortex, as we would send a digital nudge to you about something that you could do better. But ultimately, you could directly connect that to provide, for example, a hormonal stimulation or something else through smart tech. So we're augmenting our ability of, like, let's think about this. We're all neural networks, right? We're all biological-based neural networks. So we're effectively augmenting the ability of our frontal cortex to dissociate from basic psychological, physiological processes that we're already exerting influence on our behavior in a way that could make us more effective. So I think the practical application is translating digital signals into biological signals, the chemicals that change the status of our neural networks. Kind of fundamentally.
So, like, for example, if I want to, I don't know, maybe not an exciting example, let's say I want to quit smoking, would that technology come into play into changing my behavior?
For sure. I mean, because it's driven by the GABAergic and serotonin receptor systems, reward-seeking behaviors. So yeah, you would give you, like, a great example is drug addiction, actually, where you would be maintained on drugs that provided the optimal surgical functioning of your neural network, because it had been biased between the chemical imbalances in your life or epigenetic previous exposures, for example.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, Gennady, what would you offer us as your prime example?
Yes, I would say the prime example would be any technologically achieved life extension, any reversal of senescence or biological aging, because I think the definition you cited is fundamentally valid in terms of transhumanism representing a philosophy that supports the overcoming of human limitations, both physical limitations and mental limitations, which Andrea talked about. But with regard to the most fundamental limitation of all, it is the finitude of the human lifespan, because if we don't exist, we can't do anything else. We can't improve ourselves in any other ways. We can't overcome any of our other limitations. And historically, our biggest obstacle has been our mortality, the fact that our time on this world is limited, and it is limited in an extremely tragic way, just as we begin to acquire knowledge and wisdom about the world and an idea of how to avoid certain pitfalls in life. Our bodies begin to fail and deteriorate, and for some it's abrupt, for some it's a more gradual process, but for everybody it's a severe obstacle to what they otherwise would have been able to do. I like to say whenever a person dies, a precious, irreplaceable individual universe is extinguished. And on the horizon, we have the possibility of averting this, of pushing back these limits dramatically within our own lifetimes. And I would say that is one of the noblest and most worthwhile causes that we can pursue. Certainly, the attainment of radical life extension or indefinite life extension or longevity, escape velocity, will fundamentally alter the constraints of human beings and lead us to think differently about our lives in all other respects in terms of what is accessible to us, what we'll be able to accomplish, what we will be able to explore and fathom about the universe.
Gotcha. Okay. We will come back and we'll talk about the consequences of adopting that and all. But let's move on to Joe. What do you think is the one thing that you think would represent what transhumanism is, as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think the definition you read implies that we have somewhere to go as a species, and that we're optimistic about having the means to go there. So, and I like, we used your example of the glasses to say, hey, don't be afraid of transhumanism. It's already in play. It's already been in play. But I think we're also looking at a discontinuous future, meaning a future which is not just an extension or improvement of the past. And so I think transhumanism is a sort of a way of placing us into that discontinuous future, which I agree with Gennady's point that, you know, curing aging, removing us from mortality as a absolute is consistent with that and is an expression of that. You know, we can't really talk about changing human behavior without changing the human condition. And so I think transhumanism is about changing the human condition and then getting all the benefits of better human behavior that come with that, if you will.
But I'm going to pin you down. Give me one example of something that you're excited about.
You know, I'm excited about living forever.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. All right. Okay. So so let me now move on to the following. We're going to start talking hopefully about how do we get from here to there, and is there consensus, for example, about do we all want to have immortality? Is that a received notion, or is it something that people didn't think about, and so forth? So anyway, so I want to differentiate, and tell me if I got this right. I want to differentiate between three types of let's call it transhumanist outputs. Right. So the first one is those that deal with human beings, like limitations in our current capabilities. Let's say I lose a hand, right? Transhumanism allows me to, get an artificial hand, and so I'm able to go back to my almost, to my ability to do what I was able to do, like curing disease, like severe diseases. All those things are, I would say, they can be under the transhumanist umbrella, to the extent that they use technology to get us back to be, the person that we want to be. Okay, that's one. And I would say that is not controversial. I don't think anybody is going to say, no, let's not create artificial hands because whatever, right? Nobody. So it's the second category I would say is those that enhance our abilities. For example, some technology, maybe some gene therapy allows us to now remember twice as much. Our recall becomes much better, right? So that's where you're taking something that you already have as a capability, right, and enhancing it. Same thing as, I think aging would fall under that category. And then there is one which is just totally things that we cannot do today at all. Like I'm thinking, like, I don't know, crazy things like digital afterlife, for example, right? As totally new concept. Maybe, going to different planets and whatever, things that are just not things that we can do today. They're not replacement of incapacitation, and they're not something that we can do, but we do better, like run faster or remember more and so forth. They are completely new. Now, I would say, I think, again, the first one is non-controversial, but the second one starts to create problems, right? When you start saying things like, we want to double aging, right? Or we want to enable us to live another 30 years, but healthy, or immortality, right? Then all kinds of issues obviously come up. And I just want to engage in an exercise where we would imagine, for example, let's just take exactly that, immortality, right? We would imagine the consequences of that, and what do we need to do between now and then to prepare ourselves for that? And then the question of, what are transhumanists doing on the social front to prepare society for those massive disruptions? I mean, the disruption that we had in social media is massive. We didn't prepare for it at all. We see the consequences of it. That's going to look like Kinderspiel compared to immortality. Are we going to learn our lessons and prepare ourselves to there? So question one, I guess, just to take it one step at a time, is, okay, let's say we all want to double our healthy life, productive life, but just as a first step. I see problems with that. What do you see the downside of that? I'll start with Andrea. Do you see the downside of that in any way? And how would you? Yeah, and how would you answer?
Well, there was an article in Psychology Today actually just showing that if people were offered a theoretical transhumanistic advance, that selection of that by individuals was also associated with dark triad traits. So the dark triad are traits that are associated with toxic leadership, Machiavellism, psychopathic behaviors, neuroticism. So yes, it's a big problem. And,
so
and it gets to intent, right? It gets to intent. What do you want to do with it?
Hang on, what did you say?
We already have those problems.
Well, hang on.
It's going to just make them worse.
Hang on 1 second. We'll take it one at a time. I just want to understand. You guys are way deep into the transhumanism, right? So you probably have concepts. The audience is not. So I just want to understand what you just said about how did that surface? Well, if you can just walk me through it. Yeah.
So the objection to transhumanistic ideas is the concept that you are giving power to a group of people who would then use that power not for their own good, but not necessarily for the good of society as a whole.
Okay, got you. All right. So you had let's see here, Joe. You had a reaction to that. Let's hear it.
Yeah, and we already have that. We already have those problems. We already have those people. We already have those inequities. But it's true. I mean, there's a book called 12 Bites, which I think it's a novelist. I think her name is Simpson, and she makes the point there that when the Industrial Revolution launched, there was a huge power and resource grab, and actually the commons of the towns of England were just seized by the industrialists. And we're seeing that now with technology. So yeah, there is that initial deployment time where it's chaos and it doesn't benefit many people. So obviously we want to get to the point where it benefits people, but I think we need change. I don't understand the conservatism of critiquing the negatives that could happen when we're having those negatives now, and they're very dangerous now. So there's at least as much danger in not changing as there is in changing, and there's a huge potential for something much better. So that's my comment.
Okay. Yes. I have a reaction to that, Joe. But before we go there, Gennady, what do you have to?
Yes, I concur with Joe. I would like to make several points. First of all, human life expectancy has already increased that dramatically several times within our history. Consider that in the Paleolithic era, hunter-gatherer average lifespans were below 20, then for most of human history, really through the 18th century, life expectancy in most of the world was under 30. During the 19th century, in most countries, it increased from the low 30s to the high 40s. And then during the 20th century, it skyrocketed from the high 40s to the high 70s in many so-called developed, though I would still say underdeveloped countries. Now the average life expectancy in the world is slightly above 70 years. So we have already dealt with these paradigm shifts, and human beings generally are more prosperous. They are more better off. They do treat one another more civilly, more humanely than humans have in the past. I have an essay from 2016 called Impacts of Indefinite Life Extension, Answers to Common Questions. And I address the question of possible drawbacks to life extension. And my answer there is that I do not see them as true drawbacks when all things are considered. Certainly, there would be massive change and there would be some upheaval because there would be transitions between old business models, old ways of living, and new ones made possible by dramatically longer lifespans. However, as Joe pointed out, this has happened with every major technological advance in history, and ultimately the long-term benefits far outweigh any transitional costs. For the people who remain alive, of course, the greatest benefit would be the preservation of their individual existences. I myself would rather deal with a lot of societal change, adaptation, having to get a new career every now and then, exploring other worlds, exploring other technologies, challenging some of the ways in which I myself have lived, rather than not existing at all. I mean, any sort of change, adaptation, challenge is preferable to not being, to being completely extinguished, not even remembering what one had been. And every day, approximately 150,000 people die. Over 100,000 of them die from causes related to biological aging. So if even by a day we can accelerate the arrival of radical life extension, we can save over 100,000 people. Imagine what they could do for our world and how they could help us navigate those changes. I think no matter how much disruption we have, it will be an immensely worthwhile outcome. But I would say even a lot of the transitional stages are going to have a lot of good effects on us as individuals and on broader human societies.
Okay. All right. Let me hang on a second. Hang on, Joe. Hang on. I just want to state my stand, and then so that you guys know where I'm coming from. Where I stand now, I do not believe that death is a problem. So just that you know, right? I believe, in fact, that it's a blessing that we have finite life in life, and then the species moves on. I believe that strongly, but I'm completely open-minded and open to being convinced that, hey, I do believe, by the way, I do believe in extending one's healthy life, right? So if I'm going to live 80, I love to live a healthy 80 or 90 and then die. That's it. That would be for me. That would be a good life. Anyway, so that's I just wanted to put that on the table, but go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, the reason you believe that, the reason you feel that way is because you have imaginary immortalities. That's the only reason anybody's okay with death. It's because they think they go on some way, whether it's religiously or the civilization or the family or the legacy or whatever. So the question that's on the table is, what do we want to live on? Do we want to live on imaginary immortalities, which leave us in a like a gray area in regards to our taking care of our bodies, taking care of our planet, how much we love one another, how connected we are? Or do we want to live on real immortality? So I think what's important to note also is that the downsides that you're attributing to immortality are in the context of the continuing poor behavior of human beings. What we're talking about is changing the condition of being human, which then changes the outputs of being human. The survival sort of greed and desperation, the power, all those things are because people live on imaginary immortality.
Yeah.
So I know it's a big pill to swallow, but what we're really talking about here isn't just empowering shitty people to live longer. It's about transforming the human condition, which nothing else so far has. Education hasn't done it, religion hasn't done it, money hasn't done it. We're talking about pressing a lever that transforms the human condition so that people aren't these abusive, selfish, petty, criminal survivors.
Okay, got it. All right. So Andrea, do you want to react to that?
Yeah, well, there's a lot there, but I think we should, I think about this from the perspective of society and the human race, not try and take our own personal aspirations, egos about how we, whether we want to live forever. And the reason I say that is, as probably everyone's very acutely aware, our climate and our Earth is reaching its tipping point, right? I mean, there's more humans on this planet than can be supported, bottom line. And we're going to pay the consequence of that. The only way the human race can survive is if we adopt a behavior that other species have that we lack. And we don't have enough of it, which is cooperation. The only way we'll solve our problems today is by all the races in the world working together in a cooperative way.
I think that's what Joe is saying, is like
that is important to change. That would be the thing I would buy into.
Otherwise, it's just
transhumanistic.
You're
help us cooperate with each other better.
So let me.
You're right, but how do we?
Right.
That's never happened. That's never ever happened in the
what is
history of history.
Because humans
hang on,
have evolved.
sorry, what is the that didn't happen? Hasn't happened? Sorry.
Well,
go ahead, Joe.
I mean, I think you have to.
Cooperation that she's talking about, this kind of connection, this kind of collaborative spirit over sort of tribal warring and selfishness.
So what you're saying, just to, again, I want to keep the audience following here. What you're saying, I think, is let's not make that a prerequisite for supporting transhumanism. Transhumanism itself is going to bring about the value changes that are needed. Is that what
if it's going to be successful, it has to do that because we have to look at the solutions from a society perspective.
So, Andrea, are you saying that before we go to transhumanism, first we need to change ourselves? Or are you saying that will happen or should be part of a core of the transhumanist mission too?
I think that I see some dangers, and I think this is what we've been kind of skirting around.
Yeah, no, I think Joe, are you saying that anyone who has apprehensions about transhumanism needs to get up and get going, or?
No, not at all. I mean, Andrea's right to say there's dangers. There are dangers, but it's not as if we can stay pat with what we've got because of what we're doing with the planet.
Yeah, we won't survive. I totally agree with that.
And just So what we need to see is that transhumanism is a means to changing the human condition, which I think is inherent in that definition. And in changing the human condition, then we have an opportunity for peace on earth and these things. There's absolutely no basis. There's no rational basis for this otherwise.
Well,
it's never been.
I think you're exactly on point.
So let me push back, and Gennady, if you can address my pushback. Okay, so in the starting from the late 70s, early 80s, all right, and I make this point every time I can because I think it's an important point. It's behind a lot of what's happening in terms of turmoil. Starting from the early 80s, the productivity and compensation stopped tracking, and all of a sudden, right, productivity shot up, right, as a hockey stick, and compensation stayed in linear uptake, right? Meaning there was a lot of wealth that was being generated that was percolating to the top, right? Which I will attribute to a lot of our ills, most of our ills coming from that maldistribution of wealth generated, right? So there is a whole bunch of trillions of dollars in the hands of a few who basically are not sharing it, and it's creating all kinds of turmoil, political, economic, and so on and so forth. Okay, so why is that relevant here? So it's relevant in the sense that it seems to me that the belief way back that enable folks to create sort of trickle down, create wealth, create whatever tools and so forth, enable wealth to be created, and then everything will take care of itself, right? We will all benefit when it's clear that that should have been a concentrated effort to ensure that we don't get into ourselves into a situation where we are today, where there is this massive percolation of wealth in the 1%, 0.4%, and the rest are, and if we had left the two together, productivity and compensation, we would have a very strong middle class who would be involved in democratic engagement, as opposed to being afraid of losing healthcare and and so on. So the consequences of stability and in a strong middle class democratic system, we would not have, I guarantee you, would not have the current crisis, the current environment crisis, because people would have spoken up early on, right? And we wouldn't have this minority deciding that women don't have the right to their body. We would not have that. 70-80% of people would be in charge of the destiny. Anyway, the point is, are we seeing the same kind of a pattern where we have a lot of faith in transhumanism, taking care of things, and then the rest will follow, as opposed to we should take lessons from the past and promote transhumanism, which will disrupt society a couple of orders of magnitude more than we have seen disruptions. And in fact, it's more imperative now to ensure that we are preparing ourselves for a future where, if we let all these great gadgets and all these longevities be only at the disposal of a very, very small few people, you'll have, let's call it mega civil war, or whatever we may call it.
Yeah, no,
Anyway, am I all over the place, or am I making a point?
I would.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.